Welcome, everybody. You are listening once again to the Authority Podcast on the B Podcast Network. Thank you for being here. And also here with me today is my guest, Danielle Nuhfer. Danielle is a former public school teacher turned coach. She has spent 20 plus years navigating the ebbs and flows of the current school system while helping her clients prioritize their own well-being so that they can be their best inside and outside their classrooms and schools. She is an author of the book, The Path of the Mindful Teacher, which we are discussing today. Danielle, welcome to the Authority.
Hi, thanks so much for letting me be here.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you here. A lot of important topics here that we started to touch on even before we started recording. The one I wanted to start with is this idea of work-life balance, right? This is kind of part of the core of what the book talks about and helping teachers to achieve this. But I wanted to ask you, how do you define that? What's the goal in that regard with respect to that term work-life balance?
Yeah, it's such a tricky balance is such a tricky word to use. The way that I like to teach it and convey it to teachers in that regard is more like seasons of our school year. So I don't necessarily see it as balance, but I see it as ebbs and flows of, the beginning of the year is we can expect to be all in. That's an expectation. But what I try to remind teachers come December is that you can't continue with that drive and with that like rigor at school and not expect to burn yourself out. So then you need to take a step back. Okay, where can I renegotiate some of my time? Where can I let go of some of those things that I was doing all the time at school that shouldn't need my attention as much anymore? Like, what can I let go of? And what can I, start to bring more of in my personal life that I maybe forgot about for like the last 2 months. So I don't necessarily think it's like a day-to-day balance that's perfect. It's more like a seasonal way to work through the school year so that you aren't just white knuckling it to every single weekend and every single vacation, because that's not what we want.
Yeah, exactly. And so as the book sort of talks through this path of the mindful teacher, the pathway to determining not only that balance, but wellness in a variety of areas. Of course, teacher mindfulness is at the root of this. And, you put out the idea of how much teacher mindfulness can change schools. Can you talk through a little bit about how that happens? Is that with regard to teacher efficacy, to environment, to sustained energy, all the above, something else entirely? What does that look like?
So the way I like to break it down in the book is, and also when I work with people, is really talking about, okay, let's look at what we have control over and let's look at what we don't have any control over. And let's really start to pay attention to the things that we can control. And especially like when I work with teachers, it's about like, what can you actually control in your classroom? Like, let's get that granular. What can we really put our energy into instead of kind of depleting our energy, being exhausted by all the things that are going on that we don't really have any control over. So I try to really help bring some mindful awareness to those places that there is a lot of, again, control.
Yeah. What are the basics of a mindfulness practice?
So the way I would suggest anybody to start, so I know mindfulness is like such a buzzword. So like
Mhm.
it's one of those words where you're like, what is she really even talking about? And what I mean when I talk about mindfulness is just paying attention on purpose without judgment. So the way I talk about it is maybe a teacher starts to pay more attention to when they react in their classroom, right? So a teacher will start to pay attention. I'll ask them, okay, for a week, just pay attention to when your heart starts to race, when you say something that you really didn't think landed well with your student, or when your face gets red or your heart starts to beat faster. Like, what are those times? Like, when does that happen? And when we start to pay attention to our bodies signaling us like, that was like that should tell me something. That continually happens. Every time a kid's late, my heart races. Or every time a kid doesn't turn in their homework, I feel some sort of anxiety. You know, that's mindfulness in action in a classroom. And then what you do is you start to create some practices to work with that. So maybe I would teach them about doing 3 deep breaths or at certain points in their day, or maybe I would teach them about in the beginning of class really grounding their feet into the floor and really paying attention to what they're going to then do next. Now, this doesn't happen without practicing when you're not in a classroom. So that's the thing. Like, it's almost like our classroom life is like the big game, and these like small mindfulness practices you can do when there aren't any kids around is the practice. So we always practice and then we bring it to the classroom, and then we practice and then we bring it to the classroom. And that's really the flow that I try to teach my teachers. It's not just about sitting in, silence. Like, that is impactful, but then you have to then go put it into a classroom and into practice.
Believe, like, broadly, associate mindfulness with the different things we're giving attention to. One of the chapters in the book that stood out to me as an interesting one that I wanted to hear your take on is one around identifying scripts and blind spots,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
importance of that and how that contributes to this. I think it might, I think once you talk about it, people will get it, but when they first hear it, it may not necessarily stand out as obvious how this relates to mindfulness and the way that you are discussing mindfulness.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite chapter in the book, because that was the game changer to me. And when I realized that I was reacting in a certain way in my classroom, and I think every teacher can relate to like a certain thing that causes them to react. And every time they do it, they're like, why did that just grind my gears so much? Or why did that
Mm-hmm.
thing just not, like, why does that always get me? Why does that certain student always like push my buttons? Like, what is that about? And once I really started to deconstruct this, and that's what I call flipping your scripts. So my script is a kid comes in late to my classroom. I think he's disrespecting me. I get a little bit confrontational with him. He gets confrontational with me back. And what does that really solve? And like, what are we doing? This little dance that I'm playing. That's my script, is that he's being disrespectful. And then once I started to learn how to flip my script, which was to really pay attention to what was happening in that moment. Again, that mindfulness, I brought mindful like awareness to that moment. And I started to realize, oh, like, I have always thought that being late meant you were disrespectful. Well, was this kid really disrespecting me? No, probably not. Like, he he probably was like talking to his girlfriend, or I had nothing to do with that. Does that mean he doesn't get a tardy slip? No, of course he does. But do I need to have so much emotion around it? Do I need to like be so impacted by that, like so wronged by that? And I'm speaking from personal experience. Like, that
Mm-hmm.
was how I felt. And once I learned how to flip the script, and that's what I call it, is I was allowing there to be a possibility for more to be. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just him being disrespectful. It was like, oh, there could have been a ton of things. All right, he was late. He gets to sign this tardy slip, and like, we move on. It didn't need to be this whole thing. And I think as teachers, we all have that thing. At least as far as I know, I've always had teachers tell me they have a thing. And like, when you start to really unwind it and look at it more mindfully, you can take a step back, and you can not take it so personally. And like, it's freeing. It's like such a freeing experience to see that there's more to the story than we are giving ourselves and the situation credit for.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, you got to the at the end and not taking it so personally. I think being the consistent theme throughout that understanding the variety of perspectives where students are coming from is may help you to understand that this probably isn't personal to them, right? Either the thing that I have, either through my experience or my cultural upbringing or whatever, have identified as being this critical important thing, may not be something that they've been exposed to. So them not behaving in the way that I think they should is not intentional, or it's not at least directed toward me as
Mhm.
an individual. It's just something that to them is more typical, which, still provides the opportunity to identify things that might be important to teach and learn, right? Or practices
Absolutely.
that you still may want to really try to implement as part of your classroom environment, but
Mhm.
to come at it from more of a constructive perspective, I guess,
Mhm.
versus feeling like it's, I don't know, punitive or
Mhm.
anything like that. Just to say, look, let's just have an open mind and understand that maybe this is new to us, but there's opportunity here for us to create something different.
Yeah, and I think that's where I don't want to get lost is the fact that, like, that doesn't mean you can't instill these values in kids or believe that, like, yes, people need to be on time for things. Like, of course, and there needs to be repercussions if there's rules and things like that. Of course, that is the case. It's just when you flip your script, you see that it's again not personal, and there's again room for, like you said, growth and a conversation, and that is much more meaningful than the way I was handling things.
Right. Yeah, maybe allows for the opportunity to reflect on why does this thing
Yeah,
matter, right?
right.
In the case of tardiness, right? Well, okay, why does it matter? It matters because one,
Mhm,
depending on how late you are, you
mhm,
may be missing something that's important.
mhm,
And that's important because that's going to affect your knowledge of that subject matter. But
mhm.
also it's important because if you go to a job interview and you're late,
Right.
they'll probably cross your name off automatically. Right? It's important. It's an important practice too. But if it's just right, like it doesn't matter that it's hurting my feelings. I mean,
Right.
it does and doesn't,
Right.
right? But
Right.
as far as the student's concerned, that's not the most important thing, or that's not why
Right.
we're here. So it's a good example of when we trace it back to, again, what mindfulness is all about and on our well-being and our sense of self, sense of purpose, sense of wellness in the role, to alleviate those stresses of feeling as though things are done
Mhm,
with the intent or the negligence toward my
mhm,
feelings, right? Just grounds you a lot better, and you feel
mhm,
a little better about, okay, let me just address this in a way that's constructive. Transitioning here, so we talked about how that's attention, right? Largely is
mhm,
mindfulness and being attentive to the right things, internal factors, our own feelings, thoughts, behaviors, and then also our surroundings. There's also a point made by another of our former guests, Amber Harper, author of Hacking Teacher Burnout and host of the Burned In Teacher podcast. She wrote an endorsement for the book, and in her endorsement, she makes the connection between attention and intention, which is a huge part of this too, in saying, in part, this book will give you the opportunity to explore ways to pay more attention to your energy, choices, outlook, and influence. And then when you focus on the right areas, then you can make the right decisions with intention, right? And the two have to go together, because there are a lot of areas and things that I think you'll introduce to some people for the first time around circumstances that often feel uncontrollable, unavoidable, but there actually is some choice in them. And with intentionality, decisions can be made to
mhm.
choose what is going to serve us better versus
Right.
what's not. But it takes understanding that first and
Mhm,
looking at, okay, how is this affecting my energy levels and
mhm.
where my energy should be, or the influence I'm having in my job to be able to do that. Can you just give a little more of your perspective on that relationship between attention and intention and how they work together in the role?
Yeah, as a teacher, that's a great question. And I think that everything tries to get our attention as teachers, right? Like we could be pulled in 1,000 different directions. Our to-do list, even though the end of the school year comes, it's just another then to-do list for the next year. So like we have everything trying to grab our attention. So when you practice mindfulness, you bring intention to trying to figure out again what is the best use of my time, what can I let go of? And it's hard to let go of certain things. Like it's hard to let go of the perfect bulletin board. It's hard to let go of having everything graded for the next day and then in the kids' hands with like all the marks and like all the things that you always have done. But sometimes it's not worth it. Like it's just not worth all the energy and the time that we think needs to be on certain things, like you said. And instead, when we look back and we say, okay, I am only one human being, what can I let go of? And make columns, like what am I doing? Like, what am I doing in a week?
Mhm.
Like, or a day? Make a list. What can I let go of? And then what can I like pause on, and be honest about it? Because I think sometimes people will say, well, I can't, there's nothing, I have to do all of it. And that's not true. Like, it's just not true. And the one place that, or my book, I have people do like a time audit of how they're spending their time. And that's a really useful tool to figure out, like, okay, let's get honest about the way we're spending our time. And then let's figure out, again, what's the biggest bang for our buck here? Like, we don't have a lot of free moments. So how can we stack tasks? How can we leave certain things that I do them all together, all my emails at one time or something like that? So you start to, but you don't know that until you pay attention to what you're actually doing. So you
Right.
can't do the intentional part unless you pay attention to the big picture without judging yourself. So just say, like, this is how I'm spending my time, and don't judge yourself. It's okay. And then get intentional about what you really want it to look like.
Yeah, and to that intentionality, the subtitle of the book is How to Choose Calm Over Chaos and Serenity Over Stress, one step at a time. Which leads to, how would you describe chaos and stress as choices? I guess is the important context for tackling this.
Yeah, it's the word choice.
Mhm.
It's the word choice, because I think I want to be careful, because I don't want to say that certain situations are okay. Like, I don't ever want to say that, like, you should be in a situation where like you're not in good working conditions and you're not getting like the things that you need to do the work that you need to do. And if they're unsafe or harmful, like, of course, like that's not what I'm talking about. But if we're letting all that aside, things we can choose to, again, if our choice is like, I want to be less stressed. Like, that's what I want. As a teacher, I want to do my job. I want to be less stressed. How do I do that? You do need to choose to let things go. Like, you do need to choose to say no so that you can say yes to a little less stress. You do need to say no to staying late to grade everything, or you might need to say no to a student who wants to stay after school every day. You might need, so there are boundaries that you need to create as a teacher so that you can choose to be less stressed. And those choices are not easy. They will change. They will change as your seasons of life change, as you're a parent. Or I used to stay after school all the time with kids, but when I had kids, then I couldn't do that anymore. And I needed to say, you know what? Other teachers can do that now because I've been doing it, and they can now do some of that. So it's not easy. So yes, I say it, choose, and it sounds like, oh, I can just choose to not be. No, it's not easy. But once you start to see that, when, again, you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. And guess what? When you are a less stressed, more on point human being, you're going to be a better teacher, and you're going to be a better person all around. And that is going to make your life better. So
Mhm.
make those choices instead of those choices making you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the phenomena, I guess, that may illustrate how these states, or at least our decision to allow ourselves to become wrapped up in these states, right, is a choice versus a predestiny, is the fact that they're contagious, right?
Mm-hmm.
That when we're around people who are just completely being overwhelmed, overcome by the stresses in their lives, or who are perpetuating chaos. Like
Hmm.
it rubs off on us versus when we're around other people who are able to maintain their steadiness and kind of see through what's going on around them and kind of let on that sense of comfort and confidence, right? That's contagious too. You say, okay,
Yes.
well, maybe this isn't so bad, or maybe, oh, maybe I'm seeing another option here because of
Hmm.
the way other people are reacting to it. And again, to your point, like not to say that there are certain environments that are, have the components of healthy or good, right?
Hmm.
There's certain environments where we probably shouldn't be, but even that relates to this, which is choosing the right path forward would likely allow us to calmly determine, what, this is the wrong, these, there's, I can't change the way this environment is. It's not the right place to be. There's things happening here that are
Right.
not okay. And
Hmm.
I need to create an alternative path for myself versus potentially just giving into that. The chaos is going to make it take much longer to make that decision, if at all. Would you categorize, of course, another one of the ideas that is closely related to all of this is burnout? Would you categorize the book and its strategies as relating more to burnout prevention, recovery, alleviation slash management? How would you say that it sort of relates to what we typically would understand as teacher burnout?
Well, so I wrote the book after going through 2 bouts of teacher burnout myself. So it's a response to having gone through this and not finding what I needed for educators. So I found lots of great tools that really supported my health and well-being outside of school. But when I started to see how I could bring a lot of these tools and practices into my classroom, that's when I started to really not heal myself, but really like I was able to be a better teacher. So this book, I would say, is for, and I started the whole book out by basically saying, like, you have 3 options. Like, you can leave the profession, you can continue down this path that of burnout or stress, or you can choose a different path. And like, you have those options. And the third path is to read this book and to start to try to do some of these practices. So I really would say I've had people tell me that every new teacher should read this book, like every new teacher to the profession should read it as kind of like a do this before you need it sort of
Mhm.
thing. And then I think I also have a lot of people who connect with it when they're like, you are talking to how I'm feeling right now, and I trust you. And I want to read what you have to say because you actually are a teacher. And I trust that you are like that you had this experience and you know that this works.
Right. Yeah, I think there is a good point behind new teachers and just people from all walks of life and professional backgrounds engaging in wellness practices, definition of their goals around wellness and mindfulness, and what they want that to look like at the outset of what they're getting into, particularly when
Mhm.
they know that the road ahead will be rocky. One, I mean, because logistically speaking, it might be a little easier to really engage in those practices before there's a million other things going on. But
Mhm.
I do also think that it's it may be the best environment to quickly embrace the authenticity of those practices and the idea that it's a true creation of the type of mentality and mindset and life and circumstances you want to have. I can see how sometimes for some people there may be some resistance to it as really difficult when they're in the middle of really overwhelming
Mhm.
circumstances and it almost can feel, I don't know, inauthentic or superficial or whatever, where they're like, okay, I feel like I'm just blocking this out, but it's really happening. And
Mhm.
eventually, if they truly do engage, they will learn otherwise. But it can be like kind of, if
Mhm.
you haven't practiced it before and you
Mhm.
wait until you really need it, it can feel almost like you just maybe doubt that it's going to work, or doubt
Mhm.
that it's really going to be substantive and transformative. I don't know if you've encountered that with different educators coming from different points of view, and the things that maybe either make them more likely to resist or embrace the practices.
Well, what came to my head was that I wrote the book in a way that is part memoir and part practice. And I did that on purpose because I wanted people who were reading the book, who picked it up, to be able to see themselves in it. And I think that's helpful. So maybe if you're not ready for the practice, just like read the first chapters or first part of every chapter, because that's where the story is, and that's where you hear like the actual story and you can see yourself. And like, so I tried to make it, the practices, be a part of it, but it's more, it also is the story of my progression through 2 bouts of teacher burnout and coming to the other side of that. So yeah, I do understand that you're like, oh, do I really need to do this? Is this just one more thing to make me feel bad about not doing right, or not knowing how to fit in, or not knowing, but I also intentionally made it very like
Mhm.
I get it. Like I get that you can't sit there for 20 minutes in the morning, like doing deep breathing exercises, like sitting cross-legged on your meditation cushion. And if you can, perfect. But that is not what you're going to be encountering when you read
Right.
this book.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, maybe another idea is, even if you know, particularly if you find yourself in a situation where, okay, I need to learn more about mindfulness and the path to well-being, because I'm clearly struggling in these areas, and you read it the first time and it's not really resonating with you,
Mhm.
put it down and come back a few days later, right?
Mhm.
Because it's so much of it is about the headspace you're in on a
Yeah.
given day and the mentality. And I mean, I can even say from my own personal experience that, like you, in my coaching practice, I often work with people on similar types of challenges, and certainly around choices and decisions and creation, and that how to do that. But I might reject my own ideas on a day when I'm in the wrong headspace, right? My coach may say to me, "Well, have you thought about it this way?" And I might say, "That's not going to work." Right?
Mhm.
The same thing that I would recommend to somebody else. But
Right.
if I'm in the wrong, if it's just the wrong day or something's going on, I might be closed-minded to the thing, and then a couple days later, I might change my tune entirely. So it is one of those things that, along with the mindfulness and just being aware of, okay, what's my attitude today? What am I experiencing? What are the things that are really weighing on me today? That it could just be the type of thing, like revisit it when you're feeling a little differently, and then you might be better able to absorb the substance versus just having that wall up.
Definitely.
But one of the important points is, we're kind of getting to some of our last ideas here, but I think it's critical that we shouldn't jump over this, which is, how does teacher wellness correspond to student wellness?
Well, you were talking about social contagion, and there's no greater example that I can give of teacher wellness is absolutely connected to student outcomes. It is. It is one of the most, I think, in my experience, one of the most overlooked connections, that is such a, well, that's silly that we keep overlooking it. Why do we keep having teachers do all these things, learning all these curriculums, teaching all these things for students or to students, but we're not ever providing teachers with the same sort of well-being and wellness training and support, but we're expecting them to like be that to the students, and then but not like provide them with the support that they need. So I think there is such a connection, and it's not even what I think. There's much research to back up the fact that stress is absolutely contagious, as are positive emotions. So when we have teachers who are feeling really confident and solid and good in their jobs, that doesn't mean there's not stress, and that doesn't mean that there's like not difficulty, but if they can see that there's places for their autonomy, that they are part of a team, that there's a communication with their administrators, that they understand they can get needs met. That's teacher wellness. That's teacher well-being. When we focus on that, they're the one, and we want our teachers to stay in their schools, because guess
Mhm.
what? Kids go through school, what, 4 years? Like, we get a new round of kids, like, you know, revolving door. But if our teachers can stay there and they are well, our cultures, our school cultures are there. It's that is the place to start, because when our teachers are on point, the students feel it permeates through the school building. So I can't stress enough. I know we get so overwhelmed about test scores and about all the things that the kids don't have, and that they don't, and that they need, and like, I get that, and like, that's real, and that is a question. Like, I don't know how to solve all the problems, but what I can say is, if we don't have teachers who are with these kids that are well, and that are taken care of, and that are knowing how to get their needs met, we aren't going to be able to do the work we need to do with students.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So I
Yeah.
think it's really connected.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's totally true that like students respond to what they see, and if they see an educator who's in any whatever emotional state, if an educator who's joyful, an
Mhm,
educator who is engaged, an educator who is overwhelmed or in a state of distress, they're going to pick up on that and feel that way. I mean, we've certainly talked about this idea in the past a couple of times on the show, particularly around the idea of student engagement,
mhm,
and how can we expect our students to be engaged in their learning if teachers are disengaged. And
mhm,
so if teachers are environments where leadership is creating a scenario where they're feeling like they're not totally plugged into their work, or they're feeling that burnout, or they're feeling like maybe I have one foot out the door, or just I'm not supported in some way, that I'm not like fully here. Of course students are going to respond to that, right? That they're going to pick up on that, and it's going to affect them and influence them. So and that's why we're here, right? And then what does that cycle lead to? That cycle leads to teacher drawing the conclusion that I'm not able to have a positive influence here. I shouldn't be here, and maybe I shouldn't be teaching at all. And then what does that do to the students? Maybe the next year they get a brand new teacher, right, with no experience. So it's just an ongoing cycle that's not positive if we're
mhm,
not aware of these things, mindful, and figuring out what can we do within our own personal control and sphere of influence. How can we support those around us to create better practices around this? And that fundamental goal being, like, we all know that we're here to support the students, right? And it's a two-way relationship too. Once I feel as though student well-being is negatively affected, whether it's because of me or because of something else, I'm also not having a really positive feeling about my role here.
mhm,
Same thing, right? So, these are good things for anybody. I know that a lot of times that, of course, for listeners who have spent their careers in education, and then these topics come up so frequently that it can feel unique. And there certainly are realities of the education profession that are unique to that profession, but the feelings of burnout and dissatisfaction and poor work-life balance, and lack of well-being are not unique. And the importance of proactively seeking practices that will work for us and help us achieve a better state are things that everybody can work towards. So hopefully everybody will pick up on some ideas here in this
mhm,
conversation that'll resonate, and maybe a new way, a little bit of a different perspective of looking at some of these things as opportunities to make choices and decisions that will serve us better, versus things that we're just kind of predetermined to have to suffer through. And in those times where there are circumstances and environments that clearly have there's a rot at the core, that will also be better able to identify those as what they are, right? As
mhm,
a negative circumstance, and be able to seek out better solutions
Mhm.
rather than feel like it's just a symptom of that's infecting everything everywhere, because that's important as well. We really, it's the choices and decisions we make as individuals that also influence and hopefully encourage better systemic decision making and creation of environments. And you sometimes you vote with your feet, and when it's clear that educators are gravitating toward schools and districts and environments that are doing things the right way and creating better, healthier environments and putting in place better support for educators, then that will put pressure on everybody to get on board with that. And that will be much better for students as well. So a lot of great stuff there. Danielle, one last question to you. Is there one takeaway that you would love our listeners to remember here? One thing, if these are new ideas to them, like one thing that they can sort of just reflect on and think about?
Yeah, I think I'd love to just go back to the take a day and just track how you're feeling. Like, you can do that tomorrow. Track the way you're feeling, try to trace your tendencies, trace those emotions, and then proceed with trying to investigate. So be an investigator. What's going on and why might it be going on? And that's a great place to start as a teacher, to just really get laser focused on how am I feeling, and then be a little curious about it. So we can all do that with an open mind, and you can do that tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, listeners, you can learn more about the path of the mindful teacher at Danielle's website, which is teachingwell.life/book. And that'll tell you where to buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, etc. And you can also learn more about Danielle's other work there on the website. Anything else people should check out there?
Yeah, if anybody wants to bring any of this work to their schools, I love to partner with school leaders who are ready to help their teachers and support their teachers bring mindfulness practices to school. So they can schedule a call with me, teachingwell.life/call, and we can start talking about what your school district looks like and how I can support you through some of my programming to bring some of this work directly to your teachers.
Excellent. So check that out if this would be beneficial to you and your teachers, and it likely would. But you know who you are, listeners. So check that out. Please do also subscribe to The Authority for more in-depth author interviews like this one coming your way every week. And visit bpodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. Danielle, thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much.
This episode was edited by Gage Sanderson.